The morning sun cast long shadows across Luna Station 7 as Captain Jake Morrison walked through the main corridor. Children of dozens of different species ran past him, their laughter echoing off the metal walls. A small Zephyrian child with blue skin and large eyes tugged at his uniform jacket. The child held up a drawing of what looked like a spaceship made of colorful blocks. "Captain Jake, look what I made," the child said in broken English. Jake knelt down and smiled. That's beautiful, Cree. Is that our station?" The child nodded enthusiastically. "Home," Cree said simply. Home. That word meant everything here on Luna Station 7. For 53,000 children from across the galaxy, this orbital facility was the only home they had ever known. Their worlds had been destroyed by war, their families killed in conflicts that had raged for generations. But here, floating in the void between Earth and its moon, they were safe. Jake stood up and continued his morning rounds. The station was massive, stretching over 20 kilometers in length and housing enough space for a small city. The outer ring contained the living quarters where the children slept in groups of 10, each room designed to accommodate different species needs. Some children needed warmer temperatures, others required specific types of light. The middle ring held the schools, recreational areas, and medical facilities. The inner core contained the administrative offices, security center, and the massive life support systems that kept everyone alive. Dr. Lisa Chung met him at the intersection of corridors 7 and 8. She looked tired but happy, the way she always did after working a night shift in the medical bay. Lisa had been on the station for 3 years, treating everything from Kithrin scale rot to Vorthan respiratory infections. She was one of the few humans who could speak 12 different alien languages fluently. "How was the night?" Jake asked. 3 new arrivals from the Outer Rim conflicts," Lisa said, adjusting her medical scanner. 2 Kithrin siblings and a Vorthan infant. "The siblings haven't spoken since they arrived. The infant has severe malnutrition," Jake nodded grimly. The Outer Rim wars had been going on for 8 years now, with no end in sight. The Kithrin Empire and the Vorthan Collective had been fighting over mining rights to a dozen star systems. Millions had died, and the refugee children kept coming to Luna Station 7. "Any word from Ambassador Parker about the peace talks?" Jake asked. Lisa shook her head. "Helen's been on Kith Prime for 2 weeks now. Last message said the negotiations was stalled. Neither side wants to give ground." They walked together toward the central hub, passing groups of children heading to their morning classes. A group of human children sat with Zephian kids, all of them working on a puzzle together. Near the viewing port, several Kithrin teenagers were teaching younger children how to play a traditional game with colored stones. This was what made Luna Station 7 special. It wasn't just a place to house war orphans. It was a place where different species learned to live together, to play together, to grow up together. The children here didn't see each other as aliens or enemies. They saw friends, brothers, sisters, family. Commander Paul Henderson was waiting for them at the security center. Paul had been with the Terran Defense Force for 20 years before, volunteering for the Sanctuary assignment. He was a big man with graying hair and kind eyes, but Jake knew he was tough as steel when it came to protecting the children. "Morning report," Paul said, handing Jake a data pad. "All sectors secure." The night shift found 2 more hidden supply caches that some of the older kids had been building. "Nothing dangerous, just extra food rations," Jake smiled. "They're getting ready for another camping trip in the rec dome, aren't they?" "Probably." The Kithrin kids have been teaching the others how to build traditional shelters. It's actually pretty impressive. The 3 of them entered the security center, where a dozen monitors showed different areas of the station. Jake could see children eating breakfast in the dining halls, attending classes in the education sector, and playing in the vast recreational domes that simulated different planetary environments. "Any messages from Earth?" Jake asked. Paul pulled up another screen. President Williams sent her weekly update. "The Galactic Council is meeting next month to discuss expanding the Sanctuary program. They want to build 3 more stations." "3 more?" Lisa looked surprised. Do we have enough staff for that? The Terran Humanitarian Corps is recruiting heavily, Paul said. They're offering excellent benefits and full citizenship to anyone willing to work with alien children. The response has been overwhelming. Jake felt a surge of pride. Humanity had always been good at adapting, at finding ways to help others. The Sanctuary program was proof of that. When the galaxy had been torn apart by endless wars, it was humans who had stepped forward with a solution. It was humans who had convinced the warring factions to recognize the neutrality of the children's stations. The morning alarm chimed, signaling the start of the school day. Jake watched the monitors as thousands of children moved through the corridors, heading to their classes. In classroom A7, human teacher Mary Johnson was showing a group of mixed-species children how to grow earth plants in hydroponics bays. In classroom B12, a Zephyrian volunteer was teaching mathematics using colored light patterns that all species could understand. I still can't believe we pulled this off, Lisa said, watching the screens. 3 years ago, nobody thought this was possible. Helen deserves most of the credit, Jake said. She spent 2 years negotiating with every major power in the galaxy. The Kithran Empire, the Vorthan Collective, the Zephyrian Confederacy. Even the minor systems agreed to respect the Sanctuary's neutrality. Ambassador Helen Parker had been the driving force behind the Sanctuary program. She was a brilliant diplomat who spoke 8 alien languages and understood the complex politics of galactic civilization better than anyone. Her argument had been simple. Children weren't enemies, they were the future. Every species had something to gain by protecting the next generation. The Sanctuary operated under strict neutrality laws. No weapons were allowed aboard except for the security forces' small arms. No military vessels could approach within 1,000,000 kilometers. No political discussions were permitted in the children's presence. Anyone who violated these rules would be banned from the station permanently. It had worked beautifully for 3 years. The children were safe, healthy, and happy. They learned about their own cultures while also learning about others. Many of the older children had already expressed interest in careers in diplomacy, medicine, or education. They wanted to help end the wars that had taken their families. Jake's communicator buzzed with an urgent message. Captain Morrison to the command center immediately. Came the voice of Lieutenant Amy Foster, the duty officer. Jake frowned. Amy never called for him unless something was seriously wrong. He looked at Lisa and Paul, who had heard the message. 2. Probably just another supply ship requesting permission to dock, Paul said. But his voice didn't sound convinced. They hurried to the command center, where Amy was staring at the long-range sensor displays. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking slightly. What is it? Jake asked. Amy pointed to the screen. Sir, we have multiple contacts approaching from 3 different vectors. The computer is identifying weapon signatures from at least 4 different species. Jake felt his blood run cold. Are they responding to our neutrality broadcasts? No, sir. They're maintaining radio silence. But, sir, the weapon signatures, they're not just from one species. I'm seeing Kithran plasma cannons, Vorthan quantum torpedoes, Zephyrian disruptor arrays, and some configurations I don't recognize. Paul stepped forward. How many ships? At least 30, sir, maybe more. They're still beyond detailed sensor range. Jake stared at the screen in disbelief. In 3 years, no one had ever approached the Sanctuary with weapons active. The neutrality treaties were sacred, respected by every major power in the galaxy. Even in the heat of battle, opposing fleets would break off combat rather than risk. Hitting the station? Time to intercept? Jake asked. 18 minutes at current speed, Amy replied. Jake's mind raced. 18 minutes to figure out what was happening and how to stop it. 18 minutes to protect 53,000 children, who had already lost everything once. Sound General Quarters, he ordered. All senior staff to the command center. And get me Ambassador Parker on the emergency channel. As the alarm klaxons began to wail throughout the station, Jake watched the approaching fleet on the sensor display. Whatever was coming, it was unlike anything the Sanctuary had ever faced. The children in his care were counting on him to keep them safe. He would not let them down. The command center filled with senior staff as the alarm continued to sound throughout Luna Station 7. Jake Morrison stood at the central console, watching the tactical display as 37 ships approached their position. The fleet moved. In perfect formation, their weapons powered and ready for combat, Dr. Lisa Chang arrived first, still wearing her medical coat from the morning rounds. Behind her came engineer Tony Rodriguez, who had been working on the station's power systems when the alarm sounded. Lieutenant Amy Foster continued monitoring the sensors, while Commander Paul Henderson coordinated with the security teams. "Report," Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. "Contact in 14 minutes, Amy said. "The fleet is maintaining course directly toward the station. All attempts at communication have been ignored." Jake activated the station-wide communication system. His voice echoed through every corridor, every classroom, every living space. "This is Captain Morrison. We are implementing emergency protocol. 7. All children and non-essential personnel are to move to the inner core shelters immediately. This is not a drill." Throughout the station, teachers began moving their students toward the reinforced shelters deep inside the station's core. Mary Johnson gathered her class of mixed-species children, speaking calmly to keep them from panicking. "We're going to play a special game today," she told them. "We're going to see how quickly we can get to the safe rooms." The children had practiced this drill dozens of times, but they had never heard the real alarm before. Some of the older kids understood what was happening and helped guide the younger ones. A group of Kithran teenagers carried the smallest children, while Zephyrian kids used their natural speed to help clear the corridors. In the medical bay, Dr. Chang worked with her staff to move the most vulnerable patients to the shielded emergency ward. The Vorthan infant she had mentioned earlier was too weak to be moved, so she stayed with the child while her nurses evacuated the others. "Jake, I need to stay here," she said over the communicator. "Some of these kids can't be moved safely." "Lisa, you have 5 minutes to get everyone to the shelters," Jake replied. "That's an order." "Understood," she said. But Jake could tell she was going to stay with the children who couldn't be moved. Tony Rodriguez was running through the station's defensive systems. Luna Station 7 had been built as a sanctuary, not a fortress. The shields were designed to protect against space debris and solar radiation, not military-grade weapons. The station had no offensive capabilities at all. "Captain, our shields can maybe handle 1 or 2 hits from standard weapons," Tony said. "But this fleet is carrying enough firepower to destroy a battleship." Jake nodded grimly. He activated the emergency broadcast system, sending out the sanctuary's protected status on all frequencies. The message went out in 12 different languages, clearly identifying Luna Station 7 as a protected humanitarian facility under galactic neutrality laws. The response came back within seconds. A cold, mechanical voice spoke in perfectly clear English. "Humanity's influence ends today." The first plasma bolt struck the station's outer hull at exactly 0847 hours. The massive structure shuddered as the shields flared and failed. Emergency lighting activated throughout the station as the main power grid fluctuated. "Hull breach in Section 12, Amy reported. "Emergency bulkheads are sealing." Jake watched in horror as the tactical display showed the attacking fleet spreading out around the station. They weren't just attacking randomly, they were targeting specific areas with surgical precision. The communication arrays went down first, then the sensor arrays, then the docking bays. "They're trying to trap us," Paul said. "No communications, no sensors, no way to evacuate." Another barrage of weapons fire tore through the station's middle ring. The recreational domes that had been filled with playing children just an hour before were now exposed to vacuum. Jake prayed that the evacuation had been completed in time. Mary Johnson was leading the last group of children toward the core shelters when the corridor ahead of them collapsed. Debris blocked their path, and she could hear the hiss of escaping air from somewhere behind them. 23 children of different species looked to her for guidance. "This way," she said, leading them toward an alternate route. But as they turned the corner, another explosion rocked the station. The bulkhead in front of them began to crack. Mary made a decision that would haunt the survivors forever. She pushed the children back and stepped toward the failing bulkhead. "Run to shelter." 7, she told them. "Don't stop, don't look back." The children ran as Mary activated the emergency seal. The bulkhead door began to close, but the pressure differential was too great. Mary threw herself against the manual override, using her body weight to force the door closed. The last thing the children heard was the sound of the seal engaging dot 23. Children lived because Mary Johnson chose to die. Throughout the station, similar scenes played out. Engineer Carlos Martinez stayed at his post to reroute power to the life support systems, knowing that the console he was working at was directly in the path of the attacking ships. Lieutenant Amy Foster continued broadcasting distress signals. Even as the command center filled with smoke and debris, Tony Rodriguez made it to 3 different emergency stations, manually activating life support systems and sealing damaged sections. On his 4th attempt, the corridor he was in took a direct hit from a Kithrin plasma cannon. His last act was to complete the circuit that would keep the core shelters pressurized. The attack lasted 18 minutes. When the weapons fire finally stopped, Luna Station 7 was a broken shell of twisted metal and shattered dreams. The outer ring had been completely destroyed, open to space. The middle ring was partially collapsed, with massive holes torn through its hull. Only the inner core remained partially intact. Protected by the station's most powerful shields, Jake Morrison found himself trapped in the command center with Paul Henderson and 2 other officers. The room was filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning electronics. Half the consoles were dark, and the tactical display showed only static. "Casualty reports," Jake said, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Paul checked his emergency communicator. "Core shelters are responding. We have approximately 800 survivors in the main shelter. Medical bay reports 53. Casualties in the emergency ward. I'm not getting responses from anywhere else. 800 survivors. Out of 53,000 souls who had called Luna Station 7 home, only 800 remained alive." The magnitude of the loss hit Jake like a physical blow. "The children," he said quietly. "Most of them made it to the shelters," Paul said. "But sir, we lost entire sections. The nursery levels, the teenage dormitories, half the educational sector." Jake stared at the static-filled screens, trying to process what had happened. In 18 minutes, everything they had built had been destroyed. 3 years of careful diplomacy, 3 years of proving that different species could live together in peace, 3 years of giving hope to children who had lost everything. Dr. Chang's voice crackled over the emergency communicator. "Jake, I need help in the medical bay. We have children here who are badly injured, and my staff is gone." "On our way," Jake replied. He turned to Paul. "Get me a count of all survivors and their locations. And find out if any of the escape pods made it out. What about the attackers?" Paul asked. Jake looked at the tactical display one more time. The attacking fleet had already begun to disperse, their mission accomplished. They had come, they had destroyed, and now they were leaving. Like it meant nothing. Like the children who had died were nothing. "They're gone," Jake said. "But this isn't over." As Jake and Paul made their way through the damaged corridors toward the medical bay, they passed through areas that had been filled with life and laughter just hours before. Now they were cold, dark, and empty. The walls were scarred with blast. Marks and debris floated in the zero gravity of the depressurized sections. In the medical bay, Dr. Chang was working frantically to treat the injured survivors. Children of different species lay on emergency cots, some crying, others too shocked to make any sound. The Vorthan infant she had refused to leave was still alive, though barely. "How many?" Jake asked quietly. 43 children in critical condition, Lisa said without looking up from her patient. "Most of them have severe injuries from the decompression. I don't know how many will make it." Jake knelt beside a small Kithrin girl who was staring at the ceiling with vacant eyes. She had been in Mary Johnson's class, one of the children who had made it to the shelter. But she had seen her teacher die and the trauma was written on her face. "What's your name?" Jake asked gently. The girl didn't respond. She just stared at nothing, her small hands clenched into fists. Jake stood up and walked to the viewing port. Through the cracked transparisteel, he could see the debris field that had once been the outer ring of Luna Station 7. Pieces of the station drifted slowly in the void, along with smaller objects that he didn't want to identify. "They killed children," he said quietly. "They attacked a sanctuary and killed children." Paul joined him at the viewing port. "The galaxy will hear about this. Every species, every government, every military force will know what happened here." The funeral ceremonies began 7 days after the attack on Luna Station 7, on every human world. In every colony, in every space station, the same ritual took place. Citizens gathered in public squares, in stadiums, and the great halls of government buildings. They came to honor the dead and to witness something that would change humanity forever. President Karen Williams stood on the steps of the Terran Capitol building on Earth, looking out at the massive crowd gathered before her. Similar crowds had assembled on Mars, on the mining colonies of the asteroid belt, on the farming worlds of the outer system. Billions of humans waited in silence for the reading to begin. "Today we remember 53,000 souls who died. Under our protection," President Williams said, her voice carried across human space by every communication network. "We will speak their names and we will not forget." The reading began, name after name, species after species, age after age. Each victim was identified, their story told, their loss acknowledged. The youngest was Cree, the small Zephyrian child, who had shown Captain Morrison his drawing just hours before the attack. The oldest was Teacher Mary Johnson, who had died saving 23 children. As the names were read, something else was happening in the depths of human space. In facilities that had been sealed for over 2 centuries, ancient machines began to hum with power. Deep beneath the surface of Luna, in caverns that appeared on no official maps, massive doors opened for the first time in generations. Admiral Roy Thompson stood in the central command chamber of Project Lazarus, watching as systems that had been dormant since the end of the last total war came online. The room was filled with displays showing manufacturing facilities, shipyards, and research stations that officially did not exist. For 200 years, these facilities had waited in darkness, maintained by automated systems and guarded by the most classified protocols in human history. How long until full activation? Admiral Thompson asked. General Steve Collins, Director of Terran Special Operations, checked his datapad. 72 hours for the first wave facilities. 2 weeks for complete industrial conversion. The manufacturing worlds are already beginning the transition. Admiral Thompson nodded. The decision had been made in the hours after the attack. President Williams had authorized the activation of humanity's deepest secrets, the military capabilities that had been hidden from the galaxy for centuries. The public knew about the Terran Defense Force, the patrol ships that protected human space, the Marines who fought in small conflicts. They had no idea about the true scope of human military power. "What about the volunteers?" Admiral Thompson asked. "Response has been overwhelming," General Collins replied. "Every survivor from Luna Station 7 has requested combat assignments. Captain Morrison is leading the first response team. Dr. Chang has asked to be assigned to psychological operations." "Admiral," Thompson frowned, "a doctor in psych ops?" "She knew those children personally," General Collins said. "She wants to make sure the people who killed them understand exactly what they destroyed." On Earth, the funeral ceremony continued. The crowd stood in absolute silence as each name was read. Parents held their children closer. Veterans of past wars remembered their own losses. But underneath the grief, something else was building. A cold anger that grew stronger with each name, each story, each life cut short. Captain Jake Morrison stood among the survivors in the temporary shelter on Luna, listening to the ceremony broadcast. The 800 survivors of the sanctuary. Attack had been given quarters in the underground facilities while the rescue operations continued. Most of the children were still in shock, unable to process what had happened to their home. "Captain Morrison," came a voice behind him. He turned to see Commander Paul Henderson, who had been promoted to admiral after the attack. "The President wants to see you." Jake followed Paul through the corridors of the underground facility. They passed through security checkpoints that required biometric scans and voice recognition. The technology here was more advanced than anything Jake had seen on the surface. As they walked deeper into the facility, he began to understand that humanity had been keeping secrets from the galaxy for a very long time. President Williams was waiting in a briefing room that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The walls were covered with displays showing star maps, fleet positions, and manufacturing statistics. At the center of the room was a holographic projector that showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. "Captain Morrison," President Williams said, standing to greet him, "I'm sorry for your loss." "I know those children meant everything to you," Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The grief was still too fresh, too raw. "I'm going to ask you to do something that will be very difficult," the president continued. "I want you to lead the first response team. I want you to find the people who ordered this attack and make them answer for what they did." "Ma'am, I'm not a soldier," Jake said. "I'm a station administrator. I've never fought in a war." "Neither had most of us before this happened," President Williams replied. "But war has been brought to us. Those children were under our protection, and we failed to keep them safe. Now we have to make sure this never happens again." She activated the holographic projector, and the galaxy map came to life. Red markers appeared in dozens of locations, showing the home systems of the various factions that had participated in the attack. "Our intelligence services have identified the groups responsible," President Williams said. "Extremist factions from the Kithran Empire, the Vorthan Collective, and the Zephyrian Confederacy. They called themselves the Galactic Purity Alliance. They believed that humanity's influence in galactic affairs was dangerous and had to be stopped." Jake stared at the red markers, each one representing a world where the killers of children lived and worked. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to show them what happens when you attack humanity's children," President Williams said. "I want you to use every tool at your disposal to make them understand the cost of their actions." Admiral Thompson stepped forward. "Captain, what you're about to see is classified at the highest levels. For 2 centuries, humanity has maintained a public military force and a hidden one. The ships you've seen, the weapons you know about, the soldiers in the regular forces represent about 10% of our true capabilities." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that humanity has been preparing for total war since the day we first left Earth," Admiral Thompson replied. "We've built weapons that don't appear in any database. We've developed technologies that the galaxy doesn't know exist. We've been hoping we would never have to use them." General Collins activated another display showing massive shipyards hidden in asteroid fields, manufacturing facilities built inside dead planets, and research stations that existed in the spaces between star systems. These facilities have been producing weapons and ships for 200 years. Everything has been automated, maintained, and improved by artificial intelligence systems that report only to the highest levels of government. "Why?" Jake asked. "Why hide all this?" "Because we learned from our own history," President Williams said. "We learned what happens when a species develops overwhelming military power. We learned what happens when fear drives policy. So we made a choice. We would be the galaxy's peacekeepers, the ones who helped others, the ones who protected the innocent. But we would also be ready if someone forced us to choose between peace and survival." She paused, looking directly at Jake. "They forced us to choose." Dr. Lisa Shang entered the briefing room, and Jake was shocked by the change in her appearance. The kind, gentle doctor who had cared for alien children was gone. In her place was someone harder, colder, more focused. She carried herself like a soldier now. "Lisa," Jake said, "what are you doing here?" "I volunteered for the psychological operations unit," she said. "I want to be there when we find the people who ordered this attack." I want them to see the face of someone who knew those children personally. The first target has been identified, General Collins said, highlighting a star system on the map. A Kithran military research facility on Tor 7. Our intelligence indicates it was used as a planning center for the attack. 300 personnel, all military, all involved in the operation. Jake looked at the target, then at the faces around him. What happens to them? That depends on you, President Williams said. You're in command of the first response team. You have access to technologies that can do anything from precision strikes to complete planetary sterilization. The choice is yours. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the children he had failed to protect. He thought about Mary Johnson, who had died saving her students. He thought about Tony Rodriguez, who had given his life to keep the life support systems running. He thought about the 800 survivors who would carry the trauma of the attack for the rest of their lives. When do we leave? He asked. The ships are ready now, Admiral Thompson said. The crews are already aboard. We're waiting for your order. Jake Morrison looked around the room one last time. In the space of a week, he had gone from a sanctuary administrator to a military commander with access to weapons that could reshape the galaxy. He had never wanted this responsibility. 6 months after the attack on Luna Station 7, the galaxy began to notice that something was wrong. Human ships had stopped appearing at the major trade routes. Human diplomats had been recalled from their posts across civilized space. Human merchants no longer visited the commercial hubs where they had done business for decades. The species that had been the most active in galactic affairs had simply vanished. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the HSS Vengeance, watching the tactical display as his fleet approached the Kithran system of Tor 7. The ship beneath his feet was unlike anything in the public records of human military vessels. It was 3 times the size of the largest known human warship, equipped with weapons that existed nowhere in the official databases and powered by technology that the galaxy had never seen. Target acquired, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake, the ship's tactical officer. The Kithran research facility is exactly where intelligence said it would be. Jake nodded, studying the display. The facility was a massive complex built into an asteroid, heavily defended by automated weapon systems and protected by energy shields that could withstand conventional attacks. 300 Kithran military personnel worked inside, including several who had been directly involved in planning the sanctuary attack. What about the defense platforms? Jake asked. 12 orbital platforms, each equipped with plasma cannons and missile launchers, Sarah replied. Standard Kithran military configuration. They're designed to stop conventional fleets. Jake allowed himself a cold smile. Too bad for them we're not conventional. The Vengeance was the first ship produced by the hidden facilities that had been activated after the sanctuary attack. It incorporated technologies that humanity had been developing in secret for 2 centuries. The hull was made from materials that could bend light around them, making the ship nearly invisible to most sensors. The weapon systems used focused energy beams that could cut through any known armor. The propulsion system allowed the ship to move through space in ways that defied conventional physics. Dr. Chang to the bridge, Jake said into his communicator. Doctor. Lisa Chang entered the bridge wearing a black uniform that marked her as a member of the Psychological Operations Unit. She looked different from the gentle doctor who had cared for alien children. Her eyes were harder now, focused on a single purpose. Are you ready? Jake asked. I've been ready for 6 months, Lisa replied. I want them to see what they did. I want them to understand exactly what they destroyed. Jake activated the communication system. This is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. You are harboring war criminals who participated in the attack on Luna Station 7, a protected humanitarian facility. You have 1 hour to surrender these individuals for trial. The response came back immediately from the facility. Commander, this is a sovereign Kithran military installation. You have no authority here. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The consequences? Jake repeated quietly. They still don't understand. He turned to Sarah. Begin the demonstration. The Vengeance moved forward at a speed that should have been impossible for a ship of its size. The Kithran defense platforms opened fire, sending dozens of plasma bolts toward the human vessel. The weapons passed harmlessly through the ship as if it wasn't there. Adaptive phasing shields, Sarah explained to the confused Kithran defenders over the open communication channel. Your weapons are firing at where we appear to be, not where we actually are. Jake watched as the enemy weapons continued to fire uselessly at his ship. Target the first defense platform. A single beam of coherent energy lanced out from the Vengeance, striking the nearest orbital platform. The massive structure simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that there wasn't even debris left behind. Molecular disruption beam? Jake announced to the facility. Your platform has been converted to its component atoms. We have 11 more shots if you'd like another demonstration. The Kithran commander's voice came back over the communication channel, now significantly less confident. What do you want? I want the 3 individuals who planned the attack on our sanctuary, Jake replied. I want them delivered to the docking bay of their own facility within 30 minutes. If they are not there, we will assume you are protecting them and act accordingly. Jake cut the communication and turned to Lisa. Are you sure about this? Those people killed children, Lisa said. They murdered 53,000 innocent beings who were under our protection. I want to look them in the eye when they realize what they've done. 27 minutes later, 3 Kithran officers were waiting in the facility's docking bay. They had been identified by human intelligence as key planners in the sanctuary attack. All 3 had been present at the meetings where the decision was made to target the children's station, the docking bay filled with a strange mist that seemed to move with purpose. When it cleared, Jake Morrison and Lisa Chang were standing in the center of the room, having somehow transported directly from their ship without using shuttles or teleportation technology that the Kithrans recognized. Personal phase shifting, Jake explained to the terrified facility staff. We can move through solid matter when we need to. The 3 Kithran officers stood in the center of the bay, surrounded by their own security forces. They wore the proud expressions of military professionals who believed they had acted correctly. I am Major Kethvar, the leader said. I assume you are here to discuss terms for our surrender. No, Lisa said, stepping forward. We're here to show you something. She activated a small device that projected a holographic display into the air above them. The image showed the interior of Luna Station 7 before the attack. Children of different species played together in the recreational areas, attended classes in the educational sectors, and lived together in the dormitory levels. This is what you destroyed, Lisa said. These are the children you murdered. The hologram shifted to show individual faces. A small Zephyrian child named Kree, who had drawn pictures of spaceships. A group of Kithran teenagers who had been teaching younger children traditional games. Human children who had been learning alien languages and cultures. We eliminated a threat to galactic stability, Major Kethvar said, though his voice was less certain now. Humanity's influence was growing too strong. The sanctuary was a symbol of that influence. A symbol, Jake repeated. You saw children. As a symbol. The hologram changed again, showing the moment of the attack. The Kithran officers watched their own weapons tearing through the station's hull, saw the desperate evacuation efforts, witnessed the deaths of the children they had targeted. You killed a 3-year-old child who called his human teacher Mama, Lisa said, her voice filled with quiet rage. You murdered teenagers who were planning to become diplomats to help end the wars that had killed their families. You destroyed the only home that 53,000 orphans had ever known. Major Kethvar's confident expression began to crack as he watched the footage. They were not human children. They were not our responsibility. They were children, Jake said simply. That was their only crime? The hologram showed the aftermath of the attack. The twisted wreckage of the station, the bodies of the children floating in space, the 800 survivors trapped in the emergency shelters. It showed Mary Johnson sacrificing herself to save 23 children, Tony Rodriguez dying at his post to keep the life support systems running. "This is what you accomplished," Lisa said. "This is your victory." The three Kithran officers stared at the images in growing horror. They had planned the attack from the safety of their military facility, treating it as a tactical problem to be solved. They had never seen the faces of the children they were targeting, never understood the reality of what they were doing. We were following orders," one of them said weakly. "So were the guards at the concentration camps?" Jake replied. "So were the soldiers who committed genocide in our own history. Following orders is not an excuse for murdering children." Lisa deactivated the hologram. "You wanted to eliminate humanity's influence in the galaxy. Congratulations, you've succeeded." "What do you mean?" Major Kethvar asked. "We're no longer interested in being galactic peacekeepers," Jake said. "We're no longer interested in diplomacy or negotiation or finding peaceful solutions to conflicts. You've shown us what happens. Only try to help others." He gestured toward the bay doors where the Vengeance waited in space. "This ship is the first of 3,000 like it. We have weapons that can destroy entire star systems. We have technologies that your species cannot even comprehend. For 2 centuries, we chose not to use them because we believed in peace. You changed our minds," Lisa added. "You made us realize that the galaxy doesn't want peace. It wants war. So we're going to give it what it wants." Jake activated his communicator. "Sarah, are the other targets ready?" "All facilities identified as part of the Galactic Purity Alliance are locked in," came the reply. 17 Kithran installations, 12 Vorthan research centers, and 8 Zephian command posts. All personnel at these locations have been confirmed as participants in the sanctuary attack. "Execute the plan," Jake ordered, across the galaxy. 37 military installations simply vanished. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Absolute watching the last Kethver world burn below them. The planet that once held billions of the alien race now showed only the red glow of molten rock through its cracked atmosphere. She felt nothing as she watched it die. 3 years had passed since the children died and humanity had kept its promise. Every single Kethver world had been reduced to ash and memories. Captain Brooks approached her with the final report. His hair had turned completely white during the war, but his eyes still burned with the same fury that had driven them all since that terrible day. He handed her the tablet showing the casualty numbers. The Kethver Confederation no longer existed. In any form. Their military was gone, their colonies were empty, and their homeworld was a tomb floating in space. "It's finished," Brooks said quietly. "The last of their fleet surrendered an hour ago. Admiral Khan's forces are processing the survivors now." Morrison nodded and turned to face the bridge crew. These men and women had followed her through the darkest chapter in human history. They had done things that would have been unthinkable. Before the bombing, they had become monsters to fight monsters and won. "Send word to all fleets," she ordered. "The Kethver Confederation is declared extinct. All human forces are to return to their assigned sectors and begin enforcement operations." The bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. They had learned to be silent during victory because winning this war felt nothing like triumph. They had saved no one and protected nothing. They had simply erased an entire species from existence because that species had murdered their children. President Carter sat in her office on Earth reading reports from across the galaxy. The other alien races had watched humanity's war with growing horror. The Veltar had tried to intervene early in the conflict, but human ships had destroyed their peace fleet without even slowing down. The Zunari had offered to mediate but received only silence from human space. Every species that had once considered humans their friends now feared them completely. Dr. Turner entered her office carrying a sealed case. Inside was his latest creation, a weapon that could destroy entire star systems by causing their suns to collapse. He had named it the Children's Wrath, and it was ready for deployment. Carter looked at the device that could end civilizations and felt only satisfaction. If anyone else tried to harm human children, they would learn what total extinction meant. "How many do we have?" she asked. 50 units are complete, Turner replied. Production will continue until every human world has at least 10. The galaxy needs to understand that we can destroy them all if they force us to. Carter signed the deployment orders and Turner left to oversee the weapons distribution. She turned back to her reports and read about the new reality humanity had created. Trade routes now required human approval to operate. Colonization projects needed human permission to proceed. Every alien government had accepted human observers who reported directly to Earth. The galaxy had become humanity's empire not through conquest but through sheer terror. Commander Sullivan walked through the rebuilt New Geneva facility that now served as humanity's primary military academy. The walls were covered with pictures of the children who had died in the bombing. Every human cadet learned their names and faces before they learned anything else. The message was clear: remember why we fight, and never let anyone forget what happens when they hurt our children. The cadets were different from the soldiers who had fought in the old wars. These young men and women had grown up knowing that their species was the most feared in the galaxy. They learned strategy and tactics, but they also learned how to inspire terror in their enemies. They studied the systematic destruction of the HFY as a textbook example of total war. In the Academy's main hall stood a statue of Dr. Lisa Martinez holding a child in her arms. The inscription read, "She died protecting our future. We live to protect theirs." Every cadet swore an oath before that statue, promising to never let another sanctuary fall. The galaxy had changed in ways that went far beyond human dominance. Species that had once expanded freely now clustered around their core worlds. Trade decreased as aliens feared that successful commerce might anger their human overlords. Scientific cooperation ended because no one wanted to share technology. With the species that had perfected extinction, the Veltar Elder Council met in emergency session for the 100th time since the war ended. Their ancient wisdom had not prepared them for a species that could abandon all moral constraints when provoked. They had tried to understand human psychology but failed completely. How could a race that had once been so peaceful become so utterly ruthless? We must find a way to coexist, Elder Keln argued. Humanity cannot remain angry forever. They are not angry, replied Elder Vash. Anger passes. What they feel is something deeper. They have made themselves into guardians of a principle. Anyone who harms human children becomes extinct. It is that simple. The Zunari had reached similar conclusions in their own discussions. Their diplomatic corps, once the finest in the galaxy, had been rendered useless. Human demands were not negotiable and human mercy was not available. They either obeyed or faced consequences that no species could survive. Captain Brooks returned to Earth for the first time since the war began. He walked through the memorial gardens where the names of every dead child were carved in black stone. The gardens stretched for miles and he knew every name by heart. He had carried their memory through every battle, and their deaths had justified every terrible thing he had done. At the center of the memorial stood a simple plaque with the words that had started humanity's transformation. They killed our children. All of them. Remember us. Below that was humanity's response. We remembered. We made them all pay. The galaxy was peaceful now, but it was the peace of the graveyard. No species dared to challenge human authority because they had seen what happened to those who tried. The HFY had learned too late that humans did not just fight wars. When truly provoked, they became war itself. President Carter looked out at the stars from her office window. Somewhere out there, alien children were learning about the species that had conquered their galaxy. They would grow up knowing that humans were not to be crossed and that human children were not to be touched. The lesson had been written in the ashes of an entire civilization. The price of peace was fear, and humanity had proven willing to pay it. They had become the galaxy's monsters to ensure that no one would ever again dare to harm their children. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Humanity had learned that sometimes, to protect what you love, you must become what you hate, and they had learned that they were very, very good at it.